I was discriminated against all my life because of my golden child sister. Finally, I got my sweet revenge on my wedding day. I faced discrimination my entire life because of my golden child sister, and she even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding. Finally, I got my revenge. My parents always favored my sister. It was pretty obvious if she accused me of something, but if I accused her, even with proof, they'd give her a lighter punishment and find a way to scold me. My parents always made sure my sister's favorite flavor was on my birthday cake, even though I hated it. They always bought her more than me and took us where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and used me as a punching bag. At first she mostly ignored me, but things got worse when we were teens. She ended up with no friends and her behavior deteriorated. Did her friends move away or ditch her because she was mean? I don't know because we were never close. My parents boasted about her achievements but never mentioned any issues, whereas they constantly highlighted my flaws as teasing material. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school and I noticed she was no longer. I don't know if she was mean or just unlucky in her friendships. My parents were always talking about her achievements, but never mentioned any issues. They were always highlighting my flaws as teasing material. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school. I noticed she was no longer. Meanwhile, I was fairly popular, and my sister realized this. She suddenly turned me from an occasional punching bag into someone she needed to take down constantly. She started accusing me and my friends of more things. My parents stopped letting me hang out with anyone, with excuses like, "They are not good people according to your sister," or "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was my extended family. Most of them lived in the same hometown, and I got along well with my cousins despite some age differences. At one gathering, I was invited to something I don't remember what, and I sadly replied that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kid self bluntly said it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. This got back to the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later I was scolded for I was grounded for a month, but after that they gave me some leeway, so it was worth it. My sister changed schools because she was embarrassed about her social status. She demanded to switch schools, and my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was. She made friends at the new school, but she never went back. She mostly ignored me, and I think she was angry that I told the family she had no friends. She never let me go, and my life remained difficult. Her friends would come over and bully me, which my parents called light teasing. I never invited friends over, because my parents were awful hosts. Or my sister would accuse them of stealing, and my parents would believe her. I did become close to my cousins though, as my parents never dared to treat family that way. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted that we were separated at one point, and my boyfriend came to find me to tell me that my sister was flirting with him. She came over in skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was annoyed and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different story. My boyfriend had tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused since she couldn't do that to me. My parents believed my boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him for a mean reason. I was a teen suffering from unfair treatment, so I was very resentful and moody and hated my sister, and I had a rocky relationship, to say the least. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight and liked showing love via food, giving more food, buying treats, etc. My sister was also overweight, whereas I was not. I've always been kind. My sister was always skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But even then, she was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything. She could demand things and my parents would deliver. The thing is, she didn't look like some sexy model, even though I was a bit self-conscious as a teenager. I didn't think my boyfriend would cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents said I couldn't date him. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I did get another boyfriend, but again my sister said he was flirting with her when he refused her advances. My parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened, but they decided that I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo and Juliet situation. My sister accused her boyfriend of flirting with her when he refused her advances. My parents believed her, even though I tried to point out that this was happening again. They decided that I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo and Juliet situation. And it all fizzled out again. Eventually, I was called a slut in high school. I was fine with making out with boys, but I refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents she spent every second telling me how good he was and why I couldn't be like my sister and find myself someone like that. That was until he stopped showing up and suddenly he was a conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well, and the unequal treatment continued. At this time she had more spending money and her curfews where my sister had a lot more freedom than I did. She could go anywhere, anytime, while I couldn't. When I pointed this out, my parents said it was because she was older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. When I pointed it out, they denied they ever said that or claimed it was because I couldn't. She was trusted like she was, and my sister's accusations against my boyfriends and friends were used as proof of my bad judgment. Time went by and it was time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college that wasn't very well regarded, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, only her achievements were considered. I don't know which colleges she applied to, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though, because whenever she got to B, we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was my parents were happy for her to go away, but they made a big fuss and said they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be leaving, but it didn't make my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow things kept disappearing from my room or she'd come up with some other issue to make my life difficult. I was still under strict curfew. My mum eventually came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me that since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. So it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation. And wait until my sister finished university to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, including part of the bills and rent. I pointed out that I could get student loans, but Mum said no because they were so caring towards me and I had such bad they were the ones who would decide if a college was worth getting into debt for. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were and never believed in my capabilities anyway. I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said, okay, my mum clearly didn't expect that and kept prying. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to never pay for my college, but I said nothing except that I understood their position. I thanked them for caring and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a lifetime of terrible parenting, I never had any expectations when it came to my education. I knew they'd find an excuse not to pay for it and make my life miserable. I never believed they'd eventually pay if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I'd been preparing for college for a long time. I was home a lot, and I didn't have many friends. I spent a lot of time studying because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came, and I worked really hard and got a scholarship. It wasn't to anywhere like an Ivy League school or anything like law or medical school, but it was good enough. I was aware that my sister would hate it and try to stop me via my parents, so I put my achievement on social media. I told them that I was forced to thank them in the post, but that they couldn't forbid me from going as they'd have to explain to the family. Initially, they were proud and even boasted about it. Then, I guess my sister got to them and they changed their minds. They even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that my sister wasn't doing well in college. Since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I stuck to my guns and they weren't happy, but they couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy again. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and so on, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to my sister and my parents stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because they'd have made a fuss about it. She moved back home, paying no bills or rent. But it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mum. Obviously, thanks to my mum pulling strings. This was all presented. I was almost there, I promised myself. I met my husband around this time. You know those people who say, if I were in that situation, I'd have done something. My husband is the type who actually does. I'm the type who is meek in any situation. And then I can't sleep at night, wishing I had done something. I'm the type of person who can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy who claps back immediately. He loves drama and loves to resolve it. If he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive. And forget about it. He's just doing something worse for revenge. He's the one who wanted me to post here and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled that I got together with him, but just because I was incapable of acting like him due to my upbringing. I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can and he treats people well, as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget. We'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out, but mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown. We decided to get married there because we weren't living too far away, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage things. Plus, there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit if needed. We put the engagement announcement and the save the date out a few months later. My parents naturally wanted to meet my fiancé. I wanted to refuse, but I was having a hard time. The distance had made me think that maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my fiancé looked like I had cancelled. At Christmas, I told him I would make sure they never got alone with him. He'd been preparing for this, even buying a high-quality recorder he could hide in his pocket to record it all. He was excited, thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her and then spread the recording. He went off to meet them, excited and keen to see what would happen. He came back later, really happy. You won't believe the awful things they wanted. We can screw them over so badly. There are so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he told me it was better if I didn't. He said I should listen to him first, otherwise I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there. Instead of flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him and my judgment, etc., they said they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition: my sister would walk down the aisle. My parents insisted that my sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding first in a wedding dress. They said it wasn't right for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair that my sister had the experience at my venue with pictures being taken in the dress. My husband will now type his part. I'm a vengeful husband. If you mess with my wife, I'll get you back. She paints me as this quick-witted dude. I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks. He even suggested that it would be a great gift. Troy would probably rather take in the horse a second time. I thought about it, and I did have a whole list of insults ready to spew, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these idiots along. So I said I needed to think about how my wife, then fiancée, would react. I ran out of there before I could give away my plans. My husband recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister. He had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. They'd softened how badly they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband was insistent on the angle of revenge, which helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over, from the ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. Then we called his much my brother was more level-headed. When we decided on a plan, we came up with a few ideas, including giving them the wrong venue address. He told us we were being foolish, but he understood that we wouldn't be able to avoid retaliation. He showed us that our ideas were. It was tricky to make it work. Some of our other ideas were also risky, so we eventually settled on the least extreme plan: act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. If that was all, it wouldn't be revenge. The rest is mostly my husband's doing, but he wants me to do there. I just wanted to mention that everything he did was previously discussed with me and they were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents and said he probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue and not wanting the family to fall apart, would be down to help them do it. He said that I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? He suggested a compromise: they'd help pay for stuff this way, and I would feel even more pressure to not say anything. As not only would we be public with our families, but I'd also be grateful for the help they gave. He said my parents looked shocked, and my grown sister literally started skipping with joy like a kid, so it was accepted. It's also worth noting that my husband claimed that due to some bad judgment and past boyfriends, I came up with the idea of using their words against them, and I'm proud of myself for doing it. I was distrustful and liked to check his phone to make sure he wasn't cheating on me. That's why it was important that nothing about this plan was ever put in writing. He went over to their house to talk. This was the start of months of deception. My parents and sister thought they were tricking me, while my husband and I were milking them. We didn't pay for the wedding. They lay low. Of course my parents wanted input in everything. This included some things that meant a lot to me, like the songs and color palette. My husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line, but since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was fair game, or so they thought. Here's what we did: we'd go to check the drink and menu options and then accept that we'd go for the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then take my sister there to try it out. She'd sigh and say it's a pity. We didn't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options. My sister would then demand my parents pay for the best. My parents would tell me not to worry. They'd pay for the most expensive option. The same was done with the photographer and flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted. Then, we expressed how I wanted some other flowers. My parents told me they wanted us to go with the flowers they'd chosen and that they'd pay for it. When it came to the wedding dress, we had a bit of a disagreement. My parents wanted me to use a dress that I didn't like. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't suit me. We had planned on saying yes and then simply not using it, but my mum sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof. I said okay, I had to stick to my guns and refuse to text. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree during all this time. They kept communications outside any text, which we made sure happened by having me reply to my sister when she tried messaging my husband. This solidified the uncontrolling and neurotic claims my husband was making, so they believed it and never risked anything in writing. Some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family. I have to admit, I'm a bit of a loner. So, the idea of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person is pretty funny to me. I even egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted to really sell that he was with them. My husband would. He pretended to tell them things without my knowledge, but he never told them. We hired security, which was really funny. My husband and I, who had seriously considered a courthouse wedding to save money for our honeymoon, ended up having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spent a dime. We called it a back-to-pay-for wedding to save money. My parents have caused me emotional damage. My husband thinks I'm okay. He just confirmed I'm right. I enjoyed the trick more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws. So, the big day arrived. My parents and sister had come up with a plan to wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it. She'd walk down the aisle by the time I heard what it was too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress. My husband took the alterations to my parents' place, where my sister still lives. He showed them as proof that he'd ruined the dress. Then he said he had to go back to me, as I was raging and he needed to. He told them he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our royal security hidden at first, as the guests and my parents arrived. They only saw a woman with a list of names to check. After my parents had settled in, we brought out the actual security, a guy who looked like a bodyguard. I told him not to let my sister in and said I'd give him a generous tip if he kept our instructions confidential. It wasn't long before the moment arrived. My parents got a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad signaled for the ceremony to start. My bridesmaids had been prepped to follow his lead, so they did so without. After they all took their places, my dad stood at the entrance waiting for me. During this time, a friend who wasn't in the wedding party texted me to get ready to avoid suspicion if my husband or bridesmaids started texting. This friend, who was also my husband's ally, was as eager to stir drama as he was and didn't mind. I wasn't a bridesmaid, so as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song began. The doors opened and I entered. My dad was shocked to see me. He tried to look behind me, but he couldn't see the venue entrance from where we were. So he had no idea what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID and it was her. He left me with a mumbled something came up. Gasps and confusion filled the room. The friend on the plan loudly asked what happened. I lied and said tearfully. He told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. My husband and I had agreed that if my dad abandoned me, I should say that to make him look as bad, as it was clear the tears weren't just acting. I was genuinely hurt and trying not to cry. The friend then loudly asked what he meant by "it shouldn't be me." She wanted to make sure everyone could hear and spread the news. Then she said she'd go and check and ran off. We'd planned for her to create chaos with the security and prevent my dad from eventually. My mum also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned that he might need to, and his desperate run to me made me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what had happened. Some left to check as well. When I made it to my husband, and everything was fine. He was there for me, joking that my sad face was so real. I guess I deserved an Oscar. He reassured me that he'd take care of my parents for what they did. We got married without any further issues. My parents didn't come back. I noticed a lot of people leaving and returning during the party, but no one dared. Someone whispered in my husband's ear and he went out. He returned later with a serious look on his face, but whispered to me that he needed to go hide before he broke character and started smiling. It worked. Here's the summary from friends and family, the security guy and my husband that I got. After the wedding, my sister turned up at the venue in a wedding dress. The security guy wouldn't let her in because we'd agreed she'd be at the wrong venue. He told her she must be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride. We gave him a good tip as promised. My dad tried threatening him with the police, saying he'd never heard of him, so he couldn't be. The security team agreed to call the police since they were hired by us and were just doing their job. My dad realized it would be too late and tried to demand that they let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister, and asking what was going on, basically stalling. My mum soon arrived, followed by others. By then, the wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do now was try to fix the situation. As everyone who learned about it was horrified, they tried to pull it off. People started screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband. When my husband was called over, he put on his best confused look and denied everything. He even had the nerve to call it gaslighting. When they insisted he had agreed to such a ridiculous plan, he demanded proof. Of course, they couldn't provide any. All the text exchanges they could show were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was screaming and crying and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to hit my husband. But security and other people held him back. They claimed they had no proof. Because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "While it was all a bit convenient, don't you think?" Then he repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" Wedding gifts. My mother was in tears. My father was changing color from purple to white. And my sister was still on the floor, crying and screaming. They kept on saying that my husband was in on it. But people kept asking why he would agree. Why there was no proof. And why they wanted my sister to do this at my wedding. They didn't have any good answers, so eventually they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. People said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me, maybe because I was the bride and not just a guest for once. It felt like everyone was trying harder to be nice, positive and excited. My husband says all the expensive food and drinks they were eating certainly helped. We had a great time. My husband kept up the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out into smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before heading off on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try to cancel them or something, so we refused. Since then, the three of them have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband wanted to keep a paper trail, which was a smart move because my sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat what she said because it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense. The important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation and called my husband a two-faced snake who fooled them for months. She even suggested he was cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, my sister's messages, and some messages from my parents, demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages where they called him names and threatened him. But he kept up the year-long delusion. I never agreed to anything. I even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in the group chat begging my family for help as he was now being harassed by them constantly. He pleaded with them to stop my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon. After they failed to ruin our wedding, he ended with a request that they not share our locations to prevent my parents from sending my sister over and claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite. My family told him they'd handle it. Since then, we've had peace. My husband is a bit disappointed that my sister didn't disobey, so he could call her out again while tearing her a new one. We'll see if it lasts. All in all, I would have preferred a normal. I had a great family at my wedding. At least for once in my life. They didn't ruin anything meaningful to me. I got back at them. Extra info: do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot. I assume you all will wonder the same. I've pondered this all my life and still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for being spoiled, so I stopped trying. I've considered many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this: I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted, but also like a miracle child. So, given the age difference, I think they didn't expect to have another child so soon or easily and didn't use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't realize my mum was pregnant until it was too late, so they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They're not well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help. They resented me, but that's just my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted that the reason won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I have a theory that it seems they never intended to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first, when she barely gets dates. They made my husband that outlandish proposition. They didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept. Or that it would even look good for them to do it by suggesting it and being refused. They acted like they were on my sister's side while still trying to avoid paying me anything. But then my husband accepted the money, and they couldn't backtrack without risking my sister turning on them. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.